we confuse growth with something good. Organic same-store growth is what should be the most important thing. Did you grow from 2 clinicians to 3? Did you grow your top-line revenue? Your variable costs only go up when you add professionals. Therefore, your margin and your EBITDA, your cash flow, should go up. That tells you if the clinic's getting better, or are you masking, flat performance with acquisition and top-line growth.
All right, we're back. Today, we're talking about one of the most celebrated words in business, scale. You can't avoid it, especially if you're on LinkedIn. And in most industries, scale sounds like progress, more locations, more efficiency, bigger footprint, better margins. But as we've discussed before, healthcare isn't most industries, because when you try to scale something that is built on trust, judgment, mentorship, relationships, and local culture, you may grow the shell while hollowing out the soul. That was the line that resonated for many from before. Your latest article is part 2 of the Scale series, and this one gets more operational. What can't be standardized, what scale is often used to justify, and what operators should actually be measuring if they want to know whether they're building something real or just getting bigger, because there's a difference. So let's start here, Larry. Everybody says they want to scale. I feel like that's even before a business starts, people are saying, well, how can we scale this? Or when will we scale? But what do most healthcare leaders actually mean when they say that word? Let's make sure we understand the terms first.
Well, let's start out this. They almost never mean what they think they mean. And the reason I say that is because the word scale has just become too ambiguous. It is a catch-all phrase now. And in my experience, which is, over 40 years now, of watching these things happen, you always hear, we're going to scale this. Almost always means one of two things. Either someone has figured out a genuine model worth replicating, or somebody has raised enough capital that they're confusing funding for proof. And in my experience, it's usually the second. In healthcare, this distinction matters enormously because you're not scaling a software product or AI or compute. You're scaling humans. Licensed professionals. These are complex patient relationships, regulatory environments that don't care how good your pitch deck is. The moment I knew this word really, really became dangerous is when I started organizations celebrate pins in the map, location count like it was a clinical outcome.
Right.
We went from 12 to 47 in 18 months. Everybody applauds. It was sort of this run-up era where more was better, more locations were better. And nobody really did ask, did the model hold? What happened to the people already there that you acquired? How many stayed after they left and how many are there now? That's when scale stops being a strategy and really becomes a story you tell investors that we're getting bigger, so therefore we have scale, where it is not. You've heard me say this before, buying things is not an advanced competency. That's the easy part. Truly doing the hard work and scaling in its truest definition is rigor, discipline, and agony, frankly.
In the article, which people can find in your Substack, and we'll put the link in the show notes, you say some of the most valuable things in healthcare cannot be scaled through standardization, like other businesses or industries. What are some of those things that cannot be scaled?
Hey, Jimmy, I lost you there for a second. Can you do the question 2?
Yeah,
go to question 2 again. Yeah, something happened.
Yep.
We got deleted. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the article on your Substack, which, by the way, we'll put the link in the show notes, you say some of the most valuable things in healthcare cannot be scaled through standardization, like under other industries, because healthcare is different. What are some of those things that cannot be scaled?
Yeah, I'll give you 4 of them, and I think they're my top 4. First is clinical judgment. And that's the capacity of the therapist, the dentist, the doctor to not only decide clinically what's going on, but to read a room, to adapt to the patient, decide what protocol needs today, when do you need to listen more, when do you need to have hands-on more. You can train for this, but you can't systematize it into a workflow. The second is trust, and that's runs rampant throughout an organization. That is the currency that matters. Between a patient and a clinician, for example, between a clinician and their manager, their business person, between the front desk and corporate. Trust gets built locally over time through repeated interactions, but you can create conditions for it, but you can't scale for it. You cannot mandate trust from a home office. So we got clinical judgment and trust. The third is culture. Culture doesn't travel in a memo. People get this wrong because they try to say we have great corporate culture while not recognizing that micro cultures within individual locations matter. They matter a lot. It doesn't scale at the speed of a rollout. It scales at really how deep is the bench of management and appreciation for it. Most management teams don't have that bench. They have slides. So after clinical judgment, trust, and culture, I would say the last one is under the group of call it mentorship or tacit knowledge skills. And these are an example, the senior clinician who pulls, a PT, new PT asides on a Tuesday and says, when this comes up, here's what I would do. It's the interactions that don't happen in any kind of standard operating procedure. It's the way people joke with one another. A little bit of that is culture, but it's really about how to get along, teamwork, collaboration, tacit knowledge, what we call the new smarts in our company. But that's half of how clinicians actually develop, if you think about it, through all those collaborative efforts. Strip that out of the workforce, and you're in trouble. So those four things, I think, are the most things we take for granted that we try to inculcate or indoctrinate, but we can't. You cannot scale those. You can only enable them.
Yeah. Well, a quote from the article was the playbook transfers process. It does not transfer judgment. That sort of feels like anybody can write an SOP. When this, then this, then this. It's everything else. It's experience, which is what we actually provide, the service. So what does that look like in the real world? The playbook transfer process, it does not transfer judgment.
Yeah, and the longer you're in a multi-site environment, the more obvious that becomes. So let's talk about processes, documentation, steps, workflows. How do you onboard a patient? How do you handle a denial? How do you close out the day? All that travels actually pretty well. You can put it in a binder. You could push it through an LMS. You could measure compliance against it. You can retest for it, and you can truly scale a lot of process. But judgment is what happens when the situation doesn't match the binder. It's the clinician who reads a patient and knows that the standard operating protocol is wrong for that particular visit. It's sort of the office manager who sees three subtle things go sideways on a Tuesday morning and doesn't need to call corporate, doesn't need the binder. They act, and they act with pride and values and support of the organization. It's the regional director who knows, which conversations do I need to sit down and have an adult conversation, or what can I do by text, or what can I do, over video? And the reality is there are just hours and hours of variation to all this. And patients don't fit into a box. And so staffing situations don't resolve. The binders are great, but the activity is the relationships. And you don't ship that in an acquisition packet. You can't put that as part of your integration team. And at the end of the day, those are the things that really matter and leave a clinic running well. Now, I like to say you need owners locally, whether or not they're actual equity owners or they act like an owner. That is more than just a statement. That actually is implying to an organization, I'm not good enough to scale, therefore I am going to entrust it to an owner who will take clinical judgment, who will take trust, who will take mentorship and tacit knowledge skills, and truly put them in an aura or an environment where it matters. Then you don't need to worry about scale. You've got local autonomy, accountability within structure, and you really have a tremendous operating platform.
Let's talk about culture, because that word gets thrown around a lot. I think it's one of those words where, like you said in the beginning, people think it means something, but it's actually something else. Why do so many organizations confuse culture with branding? Colors, logo, pizza parties, funny things that they do. That feels like that's what you see, but that can't be culture. So why do so many organizations confuse culture with branding?
Yeah, it's because branding is a little bit easier to produce, and culture is really hard to build. But even back to branding for a minute, branding has a true economic equation. It is the equity value above and beyond your book value. So Coke's value as a brand, Google's value as a brand, Apple's value as a brand is much greater than their equity value. It's sort of like the word scale. We've now branding to mean so many other things. And you're exactly right. It's a value statement on a wall. It's a logo. It's a set of core values in a lanyard, right? Hashtag that the marketing team, does. And all of those things, you can show it actually branding standards and things. We have those and you show them on slides, right? But culture is much more different. Culture is literally, how does the team act when leadership isn't watching? And you know what? Most of the time in business, particularly healthcare, the leader isn't typically watching. It's how the manager handles a complaint. It's their emotional intelligence, if you will, whether a clinician feels safe with a difficult conversation or confronting or flagging a problem. What gets rewarded informally is your culture. What gets quietly tolerated can become your culture. How the front desk treats a frustrated patient, at 4:50 p.m. on Friday, that's your culture. You can't produce that in a quarter. You have to build that over years. And here's where the confusion between branding and culture, I think it's really destructive. When a platform grows quickly, leadership starts looking at ways that they transmit culture, which to get it again at scale. And because the real thing takes too long, they default it to a shortcut. They commission a values exercise, they print the t-shirts, they do all the hands video, they mistake the package for the product, and the team notices immediately. And this is a key integration area. You want to unify things, but also embrace and understand legacy. I think what I try to really lecture in my companies that are really collective quilts of various different companies targeted together through, in some cases, mergers and acquisition. And you have to honor the past. You have to celebrate the present, and you have to embrace the future. And culture integration cannot absolutely be scaled. You don't buy a company and then say, you're going to inherit our culture.
Right.
You partner with a company and individuals, and you say, we are going to honor your past and understand your values. And you know what? We're not going to try to replace your values. We're going to try to augment them. That's what a true company that understands the difference between branding and culture.
You've said so many operators use scale, this term scale, to justify decisions that simply make clinicians' lives worse. And clinicians are a big part of the product. And if their lives are worse, they might leave, and then your organization gets weaker. So what are the most common examples of using that scale to justify maybe poor decisions?
Yeah. So what I tell folks in integrations of companies, there are minor issues that will change. We might change your payroll vendor. You won't even blink at, but you need to understand. There are those that are a little bit more difficult to change, and you're going to say, but we're going to sit down and have a conversation and get to understand. And then there are going to be a third level changes over time. And I believe 18 months is a good, milestone marker, that are harder to accept because you didn't always used to do it that way. You always use this vendor. Now we're going to ask you to change, and here's why. That is going to be tougher, but we'll get through it. But it's remarkably consistent in healthcare platforms, PT, dental, primary care, of what tries to happen. So here are a few. Centralized scheduling that ignores local reality. The markets are different. You've seen one market and you've seen one market. Therefore, the reimbursement is different. The employers are different. The health insurance is different. So somebody in a regional office is trying to optimize your schedule, but gets very little feedback from the local office and doesn't understand payer mix or case mix, doesn't understand that a new grad can't see as much as somebody who's seasoned. All of those different things. So centralized scheduling is a good thing to think about scaling, but it has to have what I call a healthy tension between centralization and decentralization. It's always harder to manage in the middle than it is on either extreme, but that's what adults, really good companies do. Productivity models that don't account for case complexity. If I am in PT and I have a women's health therapist or a pelvic pain therapist, they're going to see a different number of patients per day than somebody seeing garden variety ankle sprains and low back pain or traditional MSK stuff. That is something that is depressing, that tries to get scaled across organization and typically fails. I think compensation models are actually, that's the first one I should have mentioned, because You cannot centralize and scale a compensation model because there's too many variations to it. But what you can do is have a variable compensation model that scales actually quite well. Um, and in physical therapy and even dental hygiene, we pay everybody the same. And so how do they make more money? They become a regional manager. We take them out of patient care, or they
Right.
become a hygiene coach. And that doesn't make any sense. You want your clinicians being the rock stars, being the athletes that make the most money, and that's just how it should be. But in PT, particularly, calls itself a doctoring profession, but refuses to mature to one. Dental and primary care and orthopedic surgery and the like, they've made that transition years ago. We just don't want it. And then I think the one that everybody cites too is, what are the local decision rights or the authority around clinical decision, and centralizing all those things when they should stay local. Even things like supplies and labs. I'll give you an example. We have, in the dental world, there are tons and tons of different labs, but the reality is you should really try to scale it down to a handful of them. But then give that local clinician the opportunity to do within the confines of that narrowed down number. Doesn't typically work that way. Um, and so, you have to have both things working, and that healthy tension around decisions and everything. But having a really clear line of distinction between what are your decision rights, what is your judgment, and what needs to go up the flagpole, so to speak, to corporate.
One of the strongest lines in the article I thought was this: the metric keeps counting locations, the damage is happening inside of them. This goes back to what you said in terms of pins on the map. What damage gets missed when you're paying attention to number of locations or pins on a map? What damage gets missed probably before you know something even bigger is going
Yeah,
on?
I mean that's the heart of the problem here. Is unit count is an easy metric. You can say it on a call. You can have ribbon cuttings and show the local politicians with you there. But inside those locations, none of the things that actually determine whether the business is healthy is really being tracked with the same intensity. Clinician turnover, kept visit rate, continuity of care, how long it takes for a new patient to get into the door, whether the founding clinicians are still there, whether they're vested on and moving out. And in acquisitions, traditional metrics tells you that the typical owner stays less than 5 years. Well, okay, that's one thing, but what about our clinicians and all of those kinds of things? What I've seen in healthcare platforms is acquisitions have been a bridge to retirement, not a bridge to leverage growth. And that's every platform that I've seen, when they go sideways, the top line might keep going up, but the bottom line gets absolutely worse. And the operators that run those platforms, they can tell you exactly what their location count is in any given day, but they can't tell you what the retention rate of their clinicians are hired 3 years ago. You should absolutely know at any given time, my first year hires, what is that retention rate? What is it at 2 and 3 years? And what is it above 3 years? And what you find is most companies are really good at the 2 and 3 year point because people get invested, but I'm sorry, above the 3 year point. But that middle category and the first category are a train wreck, particularly in this post pandemic world. We are absolutely confusing turnover rate aggregated with what it is parsed by the number of years that you've been with an organization. And then, second to that, what I see is companies not including involuntary turnover into their retention. We had a whole series of articles on retention. So what happens is you make a bad hire, they don't pass, let's just say they don't pass their licensure exam. Well, they leave, you have to replace them. That is turnover. But somehow or another, we want to carve the bad apple. Oh, we got rid of them, they were a bad clinician. That is still turnover. It doesn't matter whether it's voluntary or involuntary. And I see a lot of folks making that mistake.
So if location count is vanity, what should smart healthcare operators actually measure? You mentioned a couple of those things just a second ago.
So I am convinced that, I hate boiling things down to one or two metrics, but I'm gonna do a couple, three for you here. But I am convinced that the number one is same store organic growth. Growth, which will be the topic of the next article. I hope it's not a series, but it might be. It's because we confuse growth with something good. And the reality is, organic same store growth is what should be the most important thing. Did you grow from 2 clinicians to 3? Did you grow your top line revenue? Your variable costs only go up when you add professionals. Therefore, your margin and your EBITDA, your cash flow, should go up. Um, are the clinics getting? That tells you if the clinic's getting better, or are you masking, flat performance with acquisition and top line growth? This one metric, same store organic growth, really separates the real good artists from the roll up artists. And my fundamental belief is you should not even qualify to do acquisitions or mergers until you can demonstrate a repeated same store organic growth model, because that's what a real operator does. All you're going to do if you don't is buy things and ruin them. Okay. And then what are you going to do? You're going to get a cycle until you buy more things until you run out of capital, and then you're over leveraged if you're in the private equity world. The second data would be that retention rate we talked about at the first year 2-3 above 3-year mark. Not game, don't game the system, measure it. You might not be able to compare it with other companies because everybody might measure it a little bit different, but that is really, really critical. Who is staying because they want to stay? That's your real workforce durability. And then the last one, I'll just kind of call it kept visit rate. The number of patients this is a tough one. The number of patients that complete their treatment plan. We talked about this cliff at the 2 and 3 visit. You get drop off. So I see more new patients, and new patients are good, till you realize that you have to continue to milk your own cows first and make sure you've maximized, not in terms of maximize profits or maximize it, but if your patients are scheduled for 5 visits, did they keep those 5 visits? So that captures drop off, no shows, and the silent sort of attrition that tells you whether patients are actually finishing their care. But if I was going to add a fourth one, it would be how many, as a percentage, how many inbound calls are answered of new patients? Because what I see happening in the non-PT world is generally better about call center knowledge and expertise, whereas in PT, we don't typically make those measurements, and we don't realize how much lost visits we're getting because we're only answering the phone 80% of the time. And in PT, the demand is as high as it's ever been. So that's serious numbers.
All right, final question. Can scale be done well then, or is the model fundamentally flawed?
Scale can absolutely be done well. Companies that do it well understand the difference between systems. They pick their battles well. We're going to scale and centralize 5 systems, but we're going to leave clinical decision-making and local decision-making and authority rights, decision rights to the clinicians. And they do it really, really well. And one of the ways I think is important is what is their percentage of salary, SGA, their overhead percentage, general administrative cost, as a percentage of the overall. And what you see is companies that don't scale well build up overheads because they create more and more functions for corporate overhead. And that's what drives clinicians in the field crazy. When you see overheads of 10 and 12 and 14%, you have to ask yourself, when I had my own practice, we were at like 10%. Now I'm part of a bigger group, but we're at 14%. So that's not right.
All right. If this episode made you uncomfortable, as always, good. Because somewhere right now, a healthcare company is celebrating growth while quietly damaging the thing that made it valuable in the first place, and then trying to repair it with a pizza party and a t-shirt giveaway. Scale isn't the enemy. Scale without wisdom or forethought probably is. If you want to go deeper, and you should, Larry's full article is linked in the show notes. And ask yourself, honestly, if you're on a platform, are you building a healthcare company or just a collection of healthcare buildings, pins on the map? All right, so I'll edit these into like just shorts. All right, it's the operator hotline, real or very real feeling calls from people inside healthcare. Call 1. We doubled locations in 2 years. Revenue is up, but turnover is up. Culture feels icky, and patients feel less connected. Is this a normal state, or are we breaking something?
You're breaking something. A normal state, first of all, you need to look at cash flow. What is your cash position if you're spending all these money either on growth of new locations, and how does that impact your balance sheet? When you start paying more attention to numbers of locations and acquisitions, and you have higher turnover, that means you're ignoring the operations in turn for the opiate of buying things, which can happen because it gets contagious and we all love buying things, whether it be shirts or things online or companies. More importantly, you're a real company when you have real operators who handle retention, who handle engagement of their employees, and who handles success and organic same clinic growth. That's what I want to know, not how many locations you've grown to.
But I can't put how many locations I have in my link. I can put how many locations I have in my LinkedIn profile, and that's easier. Call 2. Our senior therapist trained everybody for years. Corporate standardized comp, and she left. Leadership says one person doesn't matter. Is leadership wrong?
Leadership is absolutely wrong. That's the difficulty of leadership. It's always easy to manage at the extremes. Treat everybody like a widget maker the same. The more enlightened companies treat every individual as an individual. You have to have some parameters that allow for variation. You might have a public health therapist or a pelvic pain therapist. You might have a spine therapist. You might have somebody who does lymphedema. You might have some, and you have to treat those folks differently. I'm very much against paying everybody the same. I think that, plays into the commoditization factor and the widget making factor. And as you know, I'm big on variable compensation for PTs and letting our PTs make more money.
All right, this one. We have a dashboard, engagement surveys, productivity scorecards, but nobody can tell me if our clinics are actually better. Why does this happen?
It happens because people love data, but not insights. The beauty of AI is that hopefully we can, prompt with appropriate questions to create analytic expertise and provide you insights. For a long time in physical therapy, we didn't even have data. Now data has probably, jumped the shark. We have data. We have to now create insights. And by the way, insights, they won't serve a purpose unless they do one thing: lead to actions and behavior and drive change.